A successful lawyer named Julian Mantle seemed to have everything: wealth, fame, and a luxurious lifestyle. Yet, despite all of his material success, he felt unfulfilled and deeply unhappy. After suffering a health crisis, Julian made a life-changing decision. He left his high-powered career and traveled to India in search of deeper meaning and peace. In India, Julian learns from wise monks who teach him valuable lessons about happiness, inner peace, and true success. These teachings transform his life, showing him that real joy doesn't come from money or possessions, but from living a life of purpose and understanding yourself. This story will help anyone who feels lost or overwhelmed by life's pressures. It offers practical steps for finding happiness and creating a life filled with meaning. If you're looking for a way to live more intentionally and discover true peace, this journey of transformation is one you shouldn't miss. Chapter 1: The Wake Up Call. Julian Mantle had everything most people could ever dream of: money, power, and success. As one of the most brilliant lawyers in the country, he was known for his sharp mind and fearless attitude in the courtroom. He lived in a grand mansion, drove a red Ferrari, and spent his evenings at the most luxurious restaurants. To the outside world, he was the perfect example of achievement, a man who had conquered life. But beneath the surface, Julian's life was falling apart. The long hours, the endless pressure, and the constant stress of his work had drained him. He barely slept. His diet consisted of fast food and coffee, and he had no time for personal relationships. He had become a prisoner of his own success, trapped in a world where winning cases and making money mattered more than his own well-being. For years, Julian ignored the warning signs. His body was giving up on him. He often felt exhausted, suffered from splitting headaches, and had a constant tightness in his chest. His colleagues noticed the changes. His once sharp appearance had faded. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and he had gained weight from his unhealthy lifestyle. But Julian refused to slow down. He convinced himself that everything was fine, that he was untouchable. Then, one fateful day, everything changed. Julian was in the middle of a high-profile trial, standing before a packed courtroom, passionately arguing his case. The tension in the room was high, and all eyes were on him. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his chest. His vision blurred, his knees buckled, and before he could speak another word, he collapsed onto the cold courtroom floor. Gasps filled the room as people rushed to his side. Paramedics arrived within minutes, loading him onto a stretcher as his colleagues and clients watched in shock. Julian, the great and powerful lawyer, was now a fragile man fighting for his life. When he woke up in the hospital, everything felt different. The white walls, the quiet beeping of machines, and the dull ache in his chest reminded him that his body had finally reached its limit. His doctor stood beside him with a serious expression. "Julian, you're lucky to be alive," he said. "If you don't change your lifestyle immediately, you won't get another chance." Those words hit Julian like a hammer. He had spent his entire life chasing success, but for what? He had sacrificed his health, his happiness, and his peace of mind for money and status. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that none of it mattered. What good was wealth if he wouldn't live long enough to enjoy it? As he lay in that hospital bed, Julian felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Not of losing a case, not of failing in business, but of dying without ever truly living. He had spent decades chasing the wrong things, and now he was left with nothing but regret. For days, he wrestled with these thoughts. He knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. He needed a change, a real change, but he had no idea where to start. He had spent his whole life focused on external success. What did it mean to live for something deeper? Then, just when he needed it most, an unexpected visitor arrived, bringing with him the answers Julian had been searching for. Chapter 2: The Mysterious Visitor. Julian sat in his study, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. His once prized possessions, his leather-bound law books, his expensive suits, the gleaming awards on his shelves, felt meaningless now. Ever since the heart attack, he had been questioning everything. What was the point of all the wealth, the power, the victories in court if he felt so empty inside? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, he was met with a familiar face, an old colleague from his law firm. But something about him had changed. The man who had once shared Julian's high-stress lifestyle now looked completely different. His face was calm, His calm, his posture relaxed, his eyes filled with a quiet confidence that Julian hadn't seen before. "Mind if I come in?" the visitor asked with a warm smile. Julian nodded and led him inside. They sat down, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the visitor spoke. "I heard about what happened to you, and I understand how you feel because I was in the same place once." Julian leaned forward, intrigued. He had always respected this man. He had been one of the best lawyers in the firm, sharp and ambitious. But now he carried himself differently, as if he had unlocked some secret Julian had yet to discover. "I was chasing success just like you," the visitor continued. "Long hours, big cases, the never-ending pressure to be the best, but it came at a cost. I was exhausted, unhappy, and constantly stressed. Then one day, I walked away from it all. I left the firm, sold everything, and traveled to India." Julian raised an eyebrow. "India?" The visitor nodded. "Yes, I met a group of monks in the Himalayas who completely changed my life. They taught me a way of living that I had never imagined, one based on peace, purpose, and true happiness. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from within." Julian listened carefully, his mind racing. Could it really be possible to live without the constant chase for more? Was there really a way to feel fulfilled without the stress, the ambition, the need to prove himself? The visitor stood up, placing a hand on Julian's shoulder before leaving. "There's another way to live," he said gently. "A better way, if you're willing to look for it." That night, Julian lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The idea of traveling to India, of leaving behind everything he had worked for, seemed crazy. And yet, deep down, something in him knew this might be exactly what he needed. Chapter 3: The Miraculous Transformation of Julian Mantle. The next morning, Julian woke up with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: clarity. The conversation with his visitor had stirred something deep inside him. He had spent his whole life chasing success, but where had it led him? A hospital bed, a near-death experience, an overwhelming sense of emptiness. He couldn't go back to that life. He wouldn't. Within weeks, Julian made a decision that shocked everyone. He sold his mansion, his Ferrari, and everything else that once defined him. He walked away from his high-powered career, leaving behind the courtroom battles and never-ending stress. His colleagues whispered about his midlife crisis. Some thought he had lost his mind. But Julian didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt alive. With nothing but a small bag of essentials, Julian boarded a flight to India, his heart pounding with both excitement and fear. He had no plan, no roadmap, only a deep need to find answers. For months, he traveled through villages, spoke to wise teachers, and immersed himself in the culture. He meditated in ancient temples, read sacred texts, and slowly let go of the mindset that had once controlled him. But it wasn't until he reached the Himalayas that his true transformation began. High in the mountains, Julian met a group of monks known as the Sages of Sivana. They lived simply, without wealth or possessions, yet they radiated an inner peace he had never seen before. Their leader, Yogi Raman, welcomed Julian as if he had been expected. "You have come a long way," the wise monk said, "and now your real journey begins." Under the guidance of the sages, Julian learned lessons that changed him completely. They taught him how to quiet his restless mind, how to control his thoughts instead of being controlled by them. He discovered the power of mindfulness, gratitude, and living with purpose. He trained his body with ancient exercises, fueled himself with nourishing foods, and felt his energy return. Slowly, the man who had once been exhausted and broken became strong again, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. One morning, Julian caught his reflection in a stream. He barely recognized himself. The deep wrinkles of stress had softened, his eyes were bright, and his body was lean and powerful. More importantly, he felt a peace that he had never known before. The anxious, overworked lawyer was gone. In his place stood a man who had found something far greater than success. He had found himself. As he sat beneath a tree watching the sunrise over the mountains, he knew his journey wasn't over. He had been given a gift, and he couldn't keep it to himself. He had to return home and share what he had learned. His mission was clear: to help others break free from the life that had once trapped him and show them the path to true happiness. Julian Mantle had been reborn, and now his real work was about to begin. Chapter 4: A Magical Meeting with the Sages of Savannah. After months of traveling through India, Julian finally reached the foothills of the Himalayas. The journey had been long and difficult, but something deep inside told him he was exactly where he needed to be. He had left behind the life of a high powered lawyer, the luxury, the pressure, everything that once defined him. Now he was just a man in search of meaning. The villagers he met along the way spoke of a hidden group of monks who lived high in the mountains, men of extraordinary wisdom and peace, known as the sages of Sivana. Few had ever seen them, and even fewer had been allowed into their world. But Julian was determined. He had not traveled across the world, just the climb was grueling. The icy winds bit at his skin and his body, though stronger than before, ached with exhaustion. But just when he thought he couldn't go any further, he spotted something in the distance, a figure, dressed in a flowing red robe, standing calmly on the mountain path. As Julian approached, the figure turned and smiled. He was an elderly man, yet there was something youthful in his bright, glowing eyes. His face radiated warmth and wisdom. "I have been expecting you," the man said softly. Julian was taken aback. "You know who I am?" The old man nodded. "Not your name, but your soul. You seek something more than what you have known. Come with me. The sages will welcome you." Julian followed the man through winding paths deeper into the mountains. Soon they arrived at a breathtaking valley, hidden away from the rest of the world. Lush gardens, vibrant flowers, and sparkling waterfalls surrounded a small monastery. Everything felt peaceful, almost magical. It was unlike anything Julian had ever seen. As he stepped inside, a group of monks dressed in bright robes turned to greet him. They carried themselves with a sense of deep calm and purpose. Julian felt an immediate sense of belonging, as if he had finally arrived home. One of the monks, a tall man with a kind expression, introduced himself as Yogi Raman, the leader of the sages. "You have traveled far," he said, "and now your true learning begins." For the first time in his life, Julian felt completely present. He wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. He was here in this sacred place, ready to learn, ready to transform. His journey with the sages of Sivana had begun. Chapter 5, A Spiritual Student of the Sages. Julian woke up to the soft glow of dawn, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Gone were the days of stress, rushing, and constant pressure. Here, in the hidden valley of Sivana, time seemed to slow down. Everything was peaceful, the flowing waterfalls, the rustling leaves, the distant chants of the monks. Under the guidance of Yogi Raman, Julian began his training. He was no longer a lawyer, no longer a man defined by his wealth or achievements. He was simply a student, eager to learn the ancient wisdom of the sages. At sunrise, the monks gathered in the gardens, sitting in stillness. Meditation was their first lesson. "The mind is like a lake," Yogi Raman explained. "When disturbed, it is cloudy, but when still, it reflects the beauty of the world." Julian struggled at first. His thoughts raced, his old worries crept in. But slowly, day by day, he learned to quiet his mind, to embrace the stillness. Next came physical training. Unlike the exhausting routines he once followed in gyms back home, the sages practiced movements that were both graceful and powerful. Through yoga and breathing exercises, Julian discovered a new kind of energy, one that didn't come from coffee or adrenaline, but from balance and self-care. His body grew stronger, his endurance increased, and for the first time in years, he felt vibrant and full of life. But the most powerful lessons came in the form of wisdom. The sages taught him that true happiness wasn't found in material success, but in mastering the mind, nurturing the body, and living with purpose. They shared ancient stories, simple yet profound, that revealed the secrets to a meaningful life. One evening, as Julian sat with Yogi Raman beneath a starlit sky, the wise monk spoke gently. "You have spent your life chasing success, yet you were never truly happy. Real success is not about what you achieve, but who you become." Julian nodded, taking in every word. He had always believed happiness would come from winning cases, earning money, and being admired. But now he saw the truth. Happiness was an inner journey, not an external prize. Days turned into weeks, and Julian continued to grow. His heart felt lighter, his mind clearer, and his spirit stronger. The old Julian, the stressed, overworked lawyer, was fading away. In his place was a new man, one who was beginning to understand what it meant to truly live. His transformation was not yet complete, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never be the same again. Chapter 6: The Wisdom of Personal Change. As Julian spent more time with the sages of Savannah, he began to understand something profound. True change begins within. It wasn't enough to simply follow the teachings or mimic the sages' peaceful lives. He had to transform from the inside out. The deep wisdom he had been seeking wasn't just about adopting new habits, but about rethinking everything he had believed to be true. One morning, Yogi Raman gathered the group around a small fire. The sky above them was a soft pink as the sun began to rise. Julian, now accustomed to the rhythm of the morning, sat quietly, waiting for the lesson to begin. The first step in any journey of change, Yogi Raman began, is the willingness to let go of who you think you are. Most of us live with a false sense of self, an identity formed by our past experiences, our achievements, and the roles we play. But these are just labels. They are not the truth of who you are. Julian listened closely, his heart racing slightly. He had spent years identifying himself as a successful lawyer, a top performer, someone who defined his worth by what he achieved. Letting go of that identity felt terrifying. But the more Yogi Raman spoke, the more Julian began to realize that the identity he had built around his career and his status had only kept him trapped in a life of constant pursuit. To change, you must first change your mind, Yogi Raman continued. You cannot expect to create a new reality if you are holding on to the old one. Julian's mind wandered to the frantic pace of his previous life. The endless meetings, the high-stakes cases, the feeling of always being on edge. He had been trapped in a cycle, constantly running, never pausing to question if it was what he truly wanted. The old Julian, the one who thought success meant more money and power, seemed like someone else now. Yogi Raman handed Julian a small, smooth stone. This stone represents your old beliefs and habits. They are heavy and burdensome. They weigh you down, keep you stuck in the past. Julian held the stone in his hand, feeling its weight. It felt real, solid, just like the beliefs he had carried with him for so long. Now, Yogi Raman said, imagine yourself releasing this stone, letting it go. Release the past, the attachments, the need to prove yourself. Only then can you begin to step into your new life. For a long moment, Julian sat with the stone, contemplating. The image of his old life, the lawyer with the fancy car and big house, seemed distant, almost unreal. Slowly, he closed his eyes, visualizing himself letting go of the stone, the weight slipping away, leaving him feeling lighter, freer. When he opened his eyes, Julian realized that the change had already begun. The wisdom of the sages had shown him that personal transformation wasn't just about acquiring new knowledge, but about shedding the old layers that no longer served him. It was about changing the way he viewed himself and the world. The weeks that followed were filled with more lessons on personal change. The sages taught him the importance of gratitude, mindfulness, and self-awareness, practices that helped him stay present and appreciate each moment. He learned that happiness wasn't a destination to reach, but a state of being that could be cultivated through conscious choices. Through these teachings, Julian started to see the world with new eyes. He felt more connected to the people around him, more compassionate toward himself. The stress and anxiety that had once defined his life began to fade. He realized that real change wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow, steady process of transformation, one that required patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to grow. As Julian sat under the vast sky that evening, watching the stars twinkle above, he understood. True wisdom isn't about knowing more. It's about becoming more. It's about shedding the layers of the old self and stepping into the fullness of who you are meant to be. Chapter 7: A Most Extraordinary Garden. Julian had learned much during his time with the sages of Savannah, but the lesson that stood out the most was the one that came from the extraordinary garden nestled in the heart of their retreat. One afternoon, Yogi Raman invited Julian to join him for a walk through the garden. It was a place that, at first glance, seemed like any other garden, lush, green, and filled with vibrant flowers. But as Julian walked through it with the sage, he soon realized there was something profoundly special about it. This garden is not just a place of beauty, Yogi Raman said, his voice calm and steady. It is a reflection of the life we cultivate within ourselves. As they strolled, Julian noticed how everything seemed to be in perfect harmony. The flowers bloomed in brilliant colors, the trees stood tall and strong, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of jasmine. It was quiet, peaceful, as if the garden itself was alive with energy. The sages here tend to this garden daily, Yogi Raman continued. Just as we nurture the plants, we must also tend to our own lives. We must cultivate the qualities we wish to see in ourselves, just as we would care for the seeds we plant. Julian looked around, taking in the beauty of the garden, but he soon noticed something else. A section of the garden that was slightly overgrown, the flowers wilting, and the plants tangled. "What about this part of the garden?" he asked. Yogi Raman smiled. "This is the part that has been neglected. It was once beautiful, but without care, it began to wither. The same can happen in our lives if we neglect certain areas, our health, our relationships, or our inner peace. If we are not mindful, they can become like this part of the garden, lacking the attention they need to grow and thrive." The lesson hit Julian hard. He had been so focused on his career and success for so long that he had neglected the most important parts of his life: his health, his happiness, and his peace of mind. Now, standing in this garden, he realized that life was like a garden. What he chose to nurture and cultivate would determine how it would grow. Yogi Raman led him to another part of the garden where a single, delicate flower bloomed in the center. Its petals were soft and pure, and it stood tall despite the many challenges it had faced. "This flower represents the life we desire," the sage said. "It takes patience, effort, and care to nurture it, but when we do, it can bloom in ways we never imagined." Julian felt a deep sense of gratitude in that moment. The garden had shown him a powerful truth that change, growth, and fulfillment didn't come from external achievements, but from the choices we make every day. It was about what we chose to focus on, what we chose to nurture, and what we allowed to grow in our hearts and minds. As they walked back toward the monastery, Julian felt a new sense of clarity. His life, like the garden, was in his hands. He had the power to cultivate peace, joy, and purpose within himself, but it would require attention, patience, and care. The garden of his life needed his daily dedication if he truly wanted to see it flourish. Julian knew the journey wasn't over, but with each step, he was learning how to tend to the most important garden of all, his own. Chapter 8: Kindling Your Inner Fire. As the days passed in the tranquil mountains, Julian found himself slowly transforming, not just in body and mind, but in spirit. The teachings of the sages had begun to take root deep within him, and he felt a quiet fire awakening inside him, a fire that had been dormant for too long. One crisp morning, after a long meditation session, Yogi Raman gathered the group of monks and Julian for a special lesson. They stood together near a small clearing in the woods where a roaring fire crackled in the center. The flames danced and flickered, casting a warm glow on the faces of those gathered around it. "This fire represents something powerful," Yogi Raman began, his voice filled with conviction. "It is the inner fire that burns within each of us, the source of our passion, our energy, and our purpose. This fire is the energy that propels us forward in life, that keeps us moving even when challenges arise." Julian watched the flames, mesmerized by their strength and beauty. He realized that this fire was exactly what he had been missing in his own life. His old existence had been driven by the constant need to achieve, to prove his worth to others, but it had never been fueled by a true sense of purpose or passion. Yogi Raman spoke again, his words reaching deep into Julian's heart. "The inner fire is often dimmed by doubt, fear, and distractions. It is hidden beneath the weight of our past, the worries of the future, and the noise of the world, but it is always there, waiting to be reignited." Julian felt a stirring inside him. Could he find his true purpose, his true passion again? Could he reignite that fire that had once burned so brightly in his youth before he became consumed by the pursuit of success and external validation? Yogi Raman noticed his gaze and smiled. "The key to rekindling your inner fire lies in the present moment. It lies in embracing the now and in doing what truly brings you joy and fulfillment. You must ignite your passion, not by seeking it externally, but by turning inward and listening to the call of your heart." For the next few weeks, Julian immersed himself in practices that helped him reconnect with his passions. He meditated on his dreams, on the things that made him feel alive. He began journaling, reflecting on the moments in his life when he had felt most inspired and energized. He spent time with the monks, learning from their quiet strength and their unwavering commitment to living with purpose. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Julian sat alone, watching the sky turn from gold to pink. His heart felt full, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace with himself. He had rekindled something deep inside, an inner fire that had been buried under the ashes of his past life. This fire wasn't fueled by ambition or the desire to achieve, but by a deeper sense of meaning and fulfillment. It was the fire of purpose. Julian realized that his true purpose wasn't about building wealth or winning cases. It was about helping others find the same peace and fulfillment he had discovered. He wanted to share the lessons of the sages with the world, to guide others who were lost in the same cycle of achievement and emptiness he had once been trapped in. As he sat in stillness, Julian felt his heart open, his soul burn brighter with this new purpose. He had kindled his inner fire, and now it was guiding him toward a life that was richer, deeper, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. He knew that the journey was just beginning, but for the first time, he was not afraid. He had the fire within him to light the way. Chapter 9: The Ancient Art of Self-Leadership. Julian had spent months with the sages of Savannah, learning about meditation, mindfulness, and the importance of cultivating inner peace. But one lesson in particular resonated deeply with him: the art of self-leadership. It was a concept that had never occurred to him before. In his old life, he had always been a leader in the courtroom, commanding respect and authority. But true leadership, as the sages taught, wasn't about controlling others. It was about mastering oneself. One morning, Yogi Raman gathered Julian and the other monks for a discussion on self-leadership. As they sat in a circle, the sage spoke softly, yet with great power. Self-leadership is the ability to guide and direct your own life, to live with intention and purpose. It is about taking responsibility for your actions, your thoughts, and your emotions. You are the captain of your own ship. Julian sat quietly, absorbing the words. He had always believed that leadership was about influencing others, about making decisions for those under his authority. But this was different. Yogi Raman wasn't talking about controlling external circumstances. He was speaking about the power of inner control. The first step in self-leadership, Yogi Raman continued, is to take full responsibility for your life. Many people blame their circumstances, their upbringing, or others for their problems. But the truth is, you are the creator of your own reality. You are the one who chooses how to respond to life's challenges. If you want to change your life, you must first change how you lead yourself. Julian reflected on this for a moment. In his past life, he had often blamed external factors, his demanding job, his clients, the pressure of society, for his stress and unhappiness. But now he realized that he had always been in control of how he responded. He could choose how to lead himself, regardless of the circumstances around him. Yogi Raman went on to share the second principle of self-leadership: clarity of purpose. A leader must have a clear vision of where they want to go. Without a sense of purpose, a person is like a ship lost at sea, drifting aimlessly with no direction. To lead yourself, you must know where you want to go and why. Julian had never truly asked himself these questions. What was his purpose? What did he want from life beyond success and wealth? The more he pondered, the more he realized that his true purpose wasn't tied to his former career. It was about helping others find peace, fulfillment, and meaning, just as he had. The third principle of self-leadership was discipline. Without discipline, all the wisdom in the world is useless, Yogi Raman said firmly. A leader must be disciplined in their thoughts, actions, and habits. Discipline is the bridge between knowledge and action. It is what turns your dreams into reality. Julian understood now that success wasn't just about making big decisions or achieving grand goals. It was about the small, consistent actions that compounded over time. It was about waking up early, practicing meditation, taking care of his body, and making choices that aligned with his purpose, day after day. As the days passed, Julian put the lessons of self-leadership into practice. He woke up each morning with intention, setting clear goals for the day and sticking to them. He became disciplined in his routines, prioritizing his health, his studies, and his inner peace. He practiced gratitude daily and reminded himself of his purpose, helping others find the same sense of meaning and fulfillment he had discovered. Julian soon realized that true self-leadership wasn't about trying to control every aspect of life. It was about guiding oneself with wisdom, purpose, and discipline. By taking ownership of his thoughts, emotions, and actions, he could create a life that was aligned with his values, rather than being swept away by the whims of the world. His journey was no longer just about personal transformation. It was about becoming a leader, not of others, but of himself. A leader who guided his own life with clarity, discipline, and purpose. And in doing so, he knew he would inspire others to do the same. Self leadership had unlocked a new level of power within Julian, one that was not based on external achievements, but on the strength of his own character. And in that power, he found the freedom to live the life he had always dreamed of. Chapter 10: The Power of Discipline. Julian had learned much from the sages of Savannah, but one lesson that stood out was the power of discipline. Yogi Raman gathered the monks and Julian one morning and began speaking about how discipline is essential for achieving anything meaningful in life. Discipline is what turns dreams into reality, Yogi Raman said. Without it, even the best intentions remain just that, intentions. With discipline, every action becomes a step closer to your goal. In his old life, Julian had been disciplined in his career, driven by deadlines and expectations. But now he realized that true discipline wasn't about meeting others' demands. It was about committing to what aligned with his own purpose. Yogi Raman explained, discipline isn't force or rigidity, it's commitment. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like it. Julian saw that true discipline meant making choices that supported his deeper values. Yogi Raman then taught a powerful practice, the 21-day habit formation rule. It takes 21 days to form a habit. Choose one habit and commit to it every day for 21 days, and it will become a part of who you are. Julian chose to focus on building small, positive habits. He committed to waking up early for meditation, eating healthy, exercising, and journaling. At times, it was difficult, but he stayed disciplined, pushing through the challenges. Slowly, these habits became part of his daily routine. Julian learned that discipline wasn't about making life harder, it was about creating a foundation for consistent growth. Each small action, each habit brought him closer to the life he desired. He realized that discipline was the key to achieving his goals and living a meaningful, purpose driven life. Chapter 11: Your Most Precious Commodity. As Julian continued his journey with the sages of Savannah, he learned many profound lessons, but one stood out as especially important: the value of time. One day, Yogi Raman gathered the monks and Julian and began speaking about the true nature of time. Time is your most precious commodity, Yogi Raman said, his voice filled with wisdom. It is something you cannot buy or get back once it is gone. The way you spend your time determines the quality of your life. Julian had never truly understood the importance of time. In his previous life, he had been caught up in a cycle of working long hours, chasing success, and constantly worrying about the future. He had lived as though time was endless, always putting off what mattered most. But now, in the peaceful mountains, he realized how much of his life he had wasted. Most people think they have plenty of time. Yogi Raman continued. But time passes quickly, and before you know it, the days are gone. What you do with the time you have is what matters. Julian reflected on his own life. How many years had he spent chasing external success, only to find it hollow? How much time had he wasted worrying about things that didn't truly matter? Yogi Raman went on to explain that living with intention was the key to using time wisely. When you live with purpose and clarity, each moment becomes valuable. You must prioritize what matters most: your health, your relationships, your inner peace, and give those things the time and energy they deserve. Julian understood now that time was not something to be taken for granted. He had to start living each day with intention, focusing on what truly mattered. He committed to making the most of each moment, whether it was spent meditating, connecting with others, or working toward his purpose. By the end of the lesson, Julian felt a deep sense of urgency, not fear, but a realization that life is too short to waste. He was determined to live with purpose, to be mindful of how he spent his time, and to create a life that truly reflected his deepest values. Yogi Raman's words echoed in his mind. Time is your most precious commodity. Use it wisely, and it will lead you to the life you desire. Julian now understood the true value of time, and he was ready to make the most of it. Chapter 12: The Ultimate Purpose of Life. As Julian's time with the sages of Savannah progressed, he found himself grappling with an essential question: what was the ultimate purpose of life? Yogi Raman had often spoken about living with purpose, but Julian still sought to understand the deeper truth behind this idea. One evening, after a long day of meditation and reflection, Julian sat with Yogi Raman under the vast, starlit sky. He asked, Master, I've learned so much about inner peace, self leadership, and discipline, but what is the ultimate purpose of life? What is it that we are truly meant to do? Yogi Raman smiled softly and said, The ultimate purpose of life is to live with love, Julian, to embrace the interconnectedness of all things, and to find meaning not in what you achieve, but in the way you love and serve others. Life's true purpose isn't found in external success, but in the inner fulfillment that comes from living with compassion, kindness, and a sense of giving. Julian sat quietly pondering these words. He had spent most of his life focused on personal achievement, climbing the corporate ladder, gaining recognition, and accumulating wealth. But now, in the peace of the Savannah Mountains, he realized that these things, while not inherently bad, had never brought him lasting fulfillment. Yogi Raman continued, True purpose comes from within. It is about connecting with your higher self and serving others with an open heart. It's about giving without expecting anything in return and finding joy in the act of kindness and service. Julian began to see that life's purpose wasn't something to be found, but something to be created. It was not about striving for external success, but about cultivating love, compassion, and selflessness in everything he did. His purpose was to make a positive impact on others and the world around him. Each of us has unique gifts and talents, Yogi Raman explained. Your purpose is to use those gifts to contribute to the greater good. It's about finding joy in the journey and recognizing that your happiness is linked to the happiness of others. Julian now understood that the ultimate purpose of life was not a singular, rigid goal, but a continuous process of living with love, purpose, and service. He realized that when he focused on loving and helping others, he would find the fulfillment he had long sought. With this newfound clarity, Julian felt a deep sense of peace. He no longer needed to chase external markers of success. Instead, he would focus on living in alignment with his values, on loving those around him, serving others, and contributing to the world in a meaningful way. The ultimate purpose of life, Julian now knew, was simple yet profound: to live with love, to serve others, and to find fulfillment in the act of giving. And in doing so, he would find the joy and purpose he had been searching for all along.
Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. If you found the video helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment.